What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with Strange Academy. Now, I want to test this out because I have no idea whether or not you guys would be receptive to it. Something else that I also want to point out here, I'm in the process of going back through and kind of getting back into reorganizing the old X-Men comics. For those of you guys who don't know, when Jonathan Hickman's whole House and Powers of X picked up, we basically paused our coverage of like the mid-2000s X-Men comics, which honestly, I think is probably one of the greatest eras in X-Men history. And then we started covering Hickman stuff. And so once that's done, we're going to go back to that. So things that lead into like Messiah Complex, Messiah War, all that kind of stuff, we're going to go back and cover all that good stuff. So yeah, just be aware of that. I'm debating on if I want to dedicate a day to it or do it as like every day over the course of the week as like a background series, which we've experimented with before, and you guys really seem to like it. But nonetheless, so here's the thing about Strange Academy. So Strange Academy is a really, really cool idea, right? It's a really, really cool concept. And honestly, this story is some of the most fun that I've ever had reading a Doctor Strange comic. I don't know what it is, but like reading stories where like teenagers gain powers, it's just fun because it takes me back to when I was younger and I wish like I had powers and I was like a little kid and a teenager. It's just fun stuff. So what this does here is this initially picks up with a young girl by the name of Emily Bright. And basically she's writing a letter to Doctor Strange, which is cute, right? She calls him Mr. Strange, right? But it's pretty cute. But basically it's designed to kind of give us this sort of synopsis on what's going on. That at a relatively young age, she discovered that she was able to do things that were basically magical in nature. There really isn't a whole lot of explanation as to how this happened. It's simply just that she was, right? One day she was able to levitate her dog while she was hanging out with her friends. Eventually she showed her mom, or at least showed both of her parents, that kind of a thing. They didn't necessarily know how to explain it. But the thing about this, and what's really intriguing here is that, as most of you guys know, when it comes to magical energy, magic can be used for a variety of effects, right? It's not one of these things where we're talking about like Emily developed telepathy, right? Where she just developed like the ability to read minds. You can do a lot with the ability to read minds, but having the ability to basically manipulate magical energy is really no different than having the ability to manipulate ambient energy. And if you can manipulate ambient energy, you can do virtually anything. It's just a matter of how much control you have over your powers. And so as a result of this, there comes a point when Emily's walking her dog, and of course her dog is hit by a car. And the result of this is she actually describes it in saying like maybe you'll believe me, maybe you won't, I don't really know, but I felt death, right? I actually felt it coming. Without knowing what I was doing, I pushed it away. She, in effect, healed her dog. Now, there's a couple different ways to interpret this, and this is really what you get into when you start talking about the ability to manipulate ambient energy inside of any one particular universe. Either the statement, I pushed death away, is metaphorical in the sense of I healed my dog and therefore my dog didn't die, or she actually did it, right? That like death, as we know, comes in the form of mistress death, right? The one true form of death, and that everybody else out there is essentially like a facsimile, right? Like kind of an avatar of mistress death. So like Hela and like all those different people who were there. Again, it's not necessarily guaranteed. It's really more just kind of a guess on behalf of fans. But the thing is, it's entirely possible that when Mistress Death was coming for this dog, that she was pushed away. Right now, most likely it's metaphorical and it's just the way in which it was phrased. But it's just one of those things where coming to this realization that she was able to do something like that, she basically starts kind of experimenting with her magic more and more. And this ultimately leads to her, of course, being under a tree while she's doing this, and then the tree attacking her, right? Which is kind of bonkers. Now, of course, you end up getting Zelma, who basically shows up out of nowhere and essentially rescues her and then takes her home to her parents to kind of explain what's going on. Now, for those of you guys who don't know who Zelma is kind of like a modern day Clea, but not really. So Clea back in the day was basically, well, at least at one point in the early days, was the protege of Stephen Strange, then eventually his girlfriend, and then eventually his wife, and then eventually the ruler of the Dark Dimension. Right? Like, damn, what happened to you and your wife? Well, she ended up taking over the Dark Dimension, and we've kind of been enemies ever since, you know? It goes that way sometimes, right? It's the season of breakups. Right, it's just one of those things. So the role that Zelma plays is kind of like a modern day sort of assistant slash protege of Stephen Strange. There doesn't really seem to be any romantic chemistry there between the two. It really seems to be more of like teacher and mentor, right? That really seems to be what it is. And she's kind of like the assistant to a degree, right? But she is still exceedingly capable. Now, when she gets back here, what's really cool about this is she basically explains to the parents of Emily that Emily needs to go to a magical school, right? Emily's got to go to Hogwarts, so like she has to go to a magical school where she basically learns, or at least where she will learn how to use her powers. Now, this is obviously a modern day depiction, or at least a magical depiction of like the Xavier School for gifted youngsters. The funny thing about this is that it's a relatively new concept in Marvel Comics. Honestly, the idea of like a particular place where young people learn how to use their powers, that's been around for a long time. The Xavier Institute really being the more popular one, but there's also like the Future Foundation of Reed Richards, there's Avengers Academy, there's all kinds of stuff, right? There's all kinds of things out there. One of the things that ends up happening is, of course, the parents are initially against it, which it makes sense, right? Like somebody shows up on your doorstep, says, hey, so your daughter is basically a witch and we're gonna have to whisk her off to a magical school that you can't visit. Just trust us. Everything will be okay, right? I mean, that sounds like a recipe for just disaster for any number of shady situations. But ultimately, it ends up being Emily that kind of talks her parents into it to a degree. And so, of course, she ends up traveling to this school. And what's really cool about this, it really does kind of give off these Hogwarts vibes, right? Where like she literally ends up traveling with Zelma, and then they basically go through like this door, which is really just kind of traveling through a pocket dimension, only to find another secret door. And then once they enter that secret door, they end up on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Now, I don't know if you guys have been to New Orleans. Man, that place is legit. Bourbon Street doesn't really look like that, right? I mean, it's just a ton of people walking around. It's like Times Square, right, in New York, except in Louisiana. But of course, they end up passing through what is in effect this kind of secret gate that nobody really seems to notice or pay any attention to, and that leads to what is in effect the Strange Academy. So again, very much Hogwarts vibes. For those of you guys who aren't really familiar with like the Harry Potter mythos, there were spells that were cast on places like Hogwarts so people wouldn't actually see it for what it was. If they got too close, they would remember they had to do something else and they would leave. There were all kinds of enchantments there to basically make sure the general public didn't just wander into the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, which would have kind of been hilarious if that had happened. But it's one of those things where what you also get is a kind of containment spell, right? Where basically you can have what is in effect an infinitely expanding space inside of a finite space, right? Defies all laws of physics. But as soon as Emily gets there, she's immediately met by this girl named Shaylee, right? Who's just ridiculously just happy, right? And just ridiculously excited. And it's one of those hilarious things because she's like bubbly and fun. And it's really interesting to see. But you end up basically finding out that Emily is really more of like the newest recruit here, right? That there's like other people who are basically around this area. What's really funny is you actually get these two guys, one of which is named Eric and the other one is Alvi, and they're actually from Asgard, right? Like they're actually from the realm of Asgard. And that's really what's going to happen here, is that over the course of this, you end up having somebody who comes through, of course, one of the magical portals. And as soon as these Asgardian kids like see this person, they see a frost giant and immediately start attacking. Of course, Loki's observing all of this, just like, man, this is kind of interesting, right? Watching everything pop off. And it's kind of like, no. This person, they're basically here as like a student. And that's when you basically get like Doyle Dormammu, right? The son of Dormammu. Now, here's the thing. As most of you guys know, Dormammu is OP, right? He's ridiculously powerful. And so when it turns out that Dormammu has a son, things get pretty wild. Now, here's the thing. In this comic, we're not going to find out where his son came from. It's simply that Dormammu actually has a son. And it's wild because the Asgardians immediately attack him. And he was like, okay, so like, I mean, that's a little judgy, but like one of the things to notice here, and this is what's so intriguing, is that while it is kind of a joke situation, right? In the sense that it's like, hey guys, look, I'm cool, you know, it's cool, everything's awesome, right? These people are launching everything they have at Doyle Dormammu, and it's not doing any good because he's just kind of dodging their attacks with the greatest of ease. They pose no real challenge to him at all. And I think the big thing here is that's designed to really show just how powerful Dormammu is, right? Like in the end, when it comes to people like Asgardians using magic and powers and things like that, they're for the most part paltry against somebody like Dormammu, right? Like Dormammu could just show up in Asgard and just lay waste to everything. And that would basically be the end of that, right? But this entire conflict is basically stopped by Jericho Drum, right? By Brother Voodoo. And so that's kind of the funny thing, is he basically tells them like, look, Doyle Dormammu is essentially a student here, right? Like he is a fellow student here as much as any of you guys. And so Loki, who's really observing this, is like, okay, so like the Lord of the Dark Dimension has a son and he's a student here. Great idea. No way this goes badly. So it's really hilarious, right? It's just one of those little funny things. But ultimately, they're all basically brought inside of the mansion, and that's one of the things, right? Loki is here, Jericho Drum is here, and you're going to see a lot of familiar faces who are basically going to be instructors here, or at least guest instructors during their training at the Strange Academy. But the other cool thing is they're given a kind of tour of this whole place, right? And so one of the things that's kind of told here is that the building itself was built in the 1800s, and like you all noticed, when you were outside the gates, nothing here has ever been what it seems. For example, your classroom for the magic of the cosmos is not what you would expect. When they open the door, it's quite literally the cosmos, right? Like literally just space, right? You know, she says like, we have actual classrooms here. This is the Mystic Parasite's lab. If you find yourself with an extra arm, you'll learn what critter in what dimension would have the right spectral bacteria to heal it, right? Beyond the classrooms, you all have access to my library and all of its content. We just ask that you take care of the books, as some of them basically predate time itself. Now, one of the funny things, one of the comments that these kids make is like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how can it possibly predate time? Here's an important thing to understand here, right? This is an important thing to grasp. Whenever it comes to like the magical concepts of the Marvel Universe, existence, at least as far as Zelma really explains it, that they predate time itself, there are beings out there that existed before anything ever existed, right? Like before anything ever occupied anything, right? So for example, the being Oblivion, right? Oblivion represents the space between multiversal collapses, right? So when a multiverse collapses, when it's destroyed by whatever manner or whatever means. So if we use the 6th iteration of the multiverse, that multiverse collapsed because the Dweller in Darkness cracked the Mcron crystal and it sucked in all existence inside of it and then exploded outward in a big bang with a new multiverse. If we take the 7th iteration of the multiverse, which was destroyed during the events of Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, right? Like regardless of whatever concept it happens to be, Oblivion represents the spaces in between, the absence of all existence. You can extrapolate that out and say Oblivion basically represents the concept of nothing that existed before the formation of the first universe, right? The first firmament. Again, it's all very abstract and very metatextual, but there are beings out there that predate all of creation. And by whatever manner and whatever means, and for whatever reason, some of them just wrote down information. Now, some of these scrolls that Zelma's talking about that predate time, she's using that in the context of like, it predates our universe, right? So there are beings like the Dweller in Darkness who existed before the current universe that basically transcribed the powers they had in their possession, right? How to use those abilities and things along those lines. And those were passed into the new universe when it was created and the new multiverse as well. So again, that's kind of the crazy thing, is because what you're seeing here are basically beings, right? These young teenagers representing different aspects of the world as we know it. Some of these teenagers are from Asgard. Some of these teenagers are from the swamp of the Man-Thing, right? Some of these teenagers are just like some kid from the suburbs in some town. Some are frost giants. All these are individuals who in some form or fashion are all basically tied to the idea or concept of ambient magical energy. And so that's when basically the students are paired off into their roommates. Right now, this is like the funniest moment, right? Where like Shay Lee is talking to Emily and she's like, yeah, we're roomies. I can't wait. I hope you like staying up late and talking and popcorn. And in the morning, I'm making waffles. It's basically that, right? Like, it's just like, she like looks like the most fun person ever to be around. But the thing about this is like, some of them are basically paired up intentionally, right? Like they don't like each other, right? It's just one of those things where it's kind of like Dormammu and like one of the Asgardian twins or Asgardian brothers are basically paired up, right? That kind of a thing. And it's really, really interesting because some of them actually end up asking to basically be traded out, right? To get different rooms. And it's like, no. You need to learn to work with your enemies, with people that you don't like. You have to learn to work with them. Now, the funny thing about this, and as you can probably imagine, is time goes on, a kind of respect will actually form among all these different students, right? They'll find themselves unified in different ways. Now, while they're all basically eating dinner and they're all kind of just talking amongst themselves in terms of like why they're here and what brought them all here, like what their commonalities are, like you guys know how that is. I mean, any of you guys who've ever been young people, right? Like when a bunch of you are grouped together, you try to find some kind of common denominator among you. And woe betide the poor soul that has nothing in common with any of you, right? Because then they're the outlier. It's like, well, we all like this show. What about you, such and such? Well, I'm not a big fan of it. You stay over there. It's that kind of a thing, right? It's a rite of passage, right? It's just one of those things. But you end up having this girl who's basically Daria in Doctor Strange, right? I don't know if you guys ever watched Daria. Great show back in the day. But she shows up here, and when one of them kind of asks the question, like, why are we all here? She chimes in and she says, because of death, because of you, because of us, because of life. And it's just being really, really cryptic and really weird. Now, part of this is also because she's like that one kid. You guys know who I'm talking about, right? Like every school has like that one kid, right? Like the one who's off in the corner who believes they can practice magic and is just weird. You guys, and here's the thing, if you don't know who that person was, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, that person was probably you. But again, you know, the question is kind of asked by Emily, like, what does any of that mean, right? Like, what is your name? And this girl says, like, it's despair, but you can call me Desi. And so she says, like, I'm a demon from Limbo, and I can see the dark, painful, desperate side of things at all times. And yes, I am a bit, as he said, extra, right? Like she's being kind of extra here. Now here's something that I want to clarify. I really want to clarify this because the nature of Limbo can be really confusing to people. So there's two different Limbos in Marvel Comics. There is the realm of Limbo, which is a true Limbo, right? Like it's where basically Kang the Conqueror was before he was Kang, when he was Immortus, where he like resided for a little while. That's the actual true Limbo. Then there is the demonic realm of Limbo. The demon realm of Limbo is the one you think of when you think of like Ilyana Rasputin, right? AKA Magic, the sister of Colossus. That's who you're thinking of, right? Like that demonic realm where like Madeline Pryor made a deal with demons and then the whole original Inferno event from the 80s kicked off. That's who you're thinking of, right? So the realm of Limbo is at least the realm that Desi is from the actual demonic realm. She can also see what's truly in people's hearts, who they really are beyond the surface. And so that's why when she's basically in a room with her roommate, like she asks her, you know, what's it like? You know, like what's it like being here? You know, where are you from? And this girl says like, well, I'm from here, right? I'm from New Orleans. This is home to me. Desi responds in saying, I'm not talking about New Orleans. I mean your secret, right? I know it's hard to keep. And this girl's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, no, it's okay. Like, I won't tell anybody, right? I'll never tell. It's my burden, right? To know what's going on with people, to know their dark secrets, but to never tell anybody. So like right off the bat, it's kind of like, okay, so like this girl is apparently shady. But that's kind of the funny thing is literally like once they get out there, you know, and they really start actually taking classes, right? They start their actual day, that Dr. Voodoo, right? Jericho Drum's kind of like, okay, this is the first year of the Strange Academy, where he says like this school has never existed, nor has it ever needed to exist. But following the restoration of magic to our world, we felt it was time to teach the Sorcerers of Tomorrow. Now, the reason why this matters and the reason why this is important is because what you had really in not too long ago, a few years ago, is you had basically a story where magic was destroyed by a group of beings called the Empirical. Now, this ultimately led to Doctor Strange going on a kind of adventure in order to rectify that and then to restore magic, which I'm pretty sure was Jason Aaron's run. And basically, when magic was essentially returned back out there to the world. One of the big things that Stephen Strange came to the realization of is that in order for the Empirical to basically destroy magic, they had to kill people who could wield magic. And in effect, Doctor Strange came to the realization that in a lot of ways, he had existed in isolation, that he hadn't really been training people on how to use their magic effectively, especially young people. And so if something like the Empirical were to happen again, these young people would be defenseless. They wouldn't know how to cope with it. Not only that, because they are young and because they are magical, in a lot of ways, they're a danger to themselves and others because they don't know how to control their abilities. And so one of them is kind of like, wait a minute. So are we like superheroes? Are we like superheroes? Which admittedly would kind of be my first question. I'd be like, oh dude, are we superheroes now? Do we get costumes? I would be excited, man. Like I would be over the moon if this was the case. But ultimately, you know, Jericho Drum's like, no, you're something else altogether, right? And he says like, the lessons are going to be hard. Like make no mistake, these lessons and what you're going to be enduring are going to be difficult. They're going to be tough. These classes are going to challenge you in incredible ways. But we also have a staff that is more than capable of being able to teach you how to function accordingly. Of course, Zelma is basically the person that is the keeper of arcane magical items. The Ancient One is back, and if you guys are interested in part 2, we'll explain how the Ancient One managed to return, or if anybody out there cares. You know, if the analytics show people care about this video, then sure. But then you also have Damon Hellstrom, who's one of the rulers of Hell. You got Nico Minoru, you've got the Scarlet Witch, who needs no explanation, you've got magic, and you've got shaman. So basically, you have what is in effect the creme de la creme of the magical community. All these beings here are ridiculously powerful. But then Doyle Dormammu asked the one question everybody wants an answer to. Okay, I mean, this is cool, and it's really nice that we have all these people training us. What about Doctor Strange? Where's Doctor Strange? This is literally called the Strange Academy. It was created by Doctor Strange. Where is Doctor Strange? And the response to Jericho Drummond is like, okay, that's a good question, Doyle. Like, as you can imagine, he keeps exceedingly busy, facing off against various threats and fighting various people. And then at that point, like, a portal opens and just like a Throzzle, like this just demonic being just comes out, and Doctor Strange is like, yeah, come get some, right? And just like fighting this thing, right? Just like just facing off against this thing. And he's like, you know, I could really use a lot of help here. So literally day one is all these kids from the Strange Academy helping Doctor Strange fight this demonic being. Now, this is really cool, and it's a huge motivator, right? Because if Doctor Strange just didn't show up on day one, I mean, it would be a little demoralizing. But not only do they actually get to see Doctor Strange and the name of the school lives up to what they expected, they get to help him fight on the first day, son. Dude, that's legit, right? It's like being able to play dodgeball in gym on the first day of school. It's just like the coolest thing, right? It's just like, yeah, okay, there's hope for this, right? Like, this year's not gonna be so bad after all. Like, literally, the entire happiness of the school year hinges on the fact that you got to play dodgeball on day one. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? It's one of those things, right? It's just the thing that improves everything. And so, of course, with the help of all these kids who, and this is one thing to understand, they are guided along the way, right? Because they're untrained, they don't know how to work together, they don't know each other's strengths and weaknesses, so they're guided by like Zelma, and they're guided by Doctor Strange and the other members of the staff, because obviously Strange and them would never let anything happen. If the situation began to basically spiral out of control, and this being proved itself to be more powerful than Doctor Strange and a danger to the students here, the staff would have told the students to leave. They would have just like teleported them away, and the staff would have fought along Doctor Strange to defeat this thing, right? So that's what would have happened. If anything, it's just a teachable moment. It's a training session to give these kids an idea of what kind of magic they will learn to harness, but also the kinds of dangers that are out there. And so ultimately, of course, this thing is basically destroyed. And it's really cool because like Doctor Strange chimes in and it's like, okay, so where were we, right? And Jericho Drum's like, well, I mean, we were just kind of giving them final words of encouragement, right? And inspiration, you know? And so ultimately Doctor Strange is like, okay, don't die, kids. No, he doesn't, right? But he says he's like, I'm always here to encourage and inspire. Those are practically my middle names. So here goes nothing, right? He says, I know some of you are freaking out at how awesome and scary all of this is. And some of you are probably thinking you don't need to be here because you're such badasses already. He says, either way, soak all of it in, have fun, and most of all, try not to die, right? So he really does kind of say, try not to die. But the reality here is these kids are gonna have the time of their life because Strange Academy is just great. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Let me know down in the comments section whether or not you guys dig this, because it is really fun. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.